Good evening, members of the House. I declare this the 16th ordinary meeting of the 175th session duly constituted and call upon the Secretary to read the minutes from the last meeting.
All right. On the 15th of February 2024, the Queen's University Belfast Literary and Scientific Society convened for the 15th ordinary meeting of the 175th session to debate the motion, "This House believes that the Republic has forgotten Northern Ireland." You'll note that there is a certain group of people that are not mentioned in that for any potential reasons there. The meeting was held at the Senate Chamber at Parliament Buildings at Stormont and was held in collaboration with someone else. The use of the Stormont Senate Chamber was kindly sponsored by Cara Hunter MLA, and the debate was chaired by somebody called Bertie Ahern. I'm not sure who that is. Anyways, the auditor of the HIST, somebody, opened the debate and welcomed everyone, guests and student speakers, and our trustee Martin Craigs, who sat there and did stuff. The attendees, blah, blah, blah. Cara Hunter then opened it, blah, blah, blah. Where have I lost my space? Cara Hunter MLA correctly declared the debate the 15th ordinary meeting of the 175th session. Given our president hadn't actually told her any of this information, that was quite impressive. So we're not really sure how she knew, but maybe there's telepathy among members of the Alliance Party. Anyways, I actually got her name right. She then remarked on the motion regarding the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, and our debate chair, Bertie Ahern's involvement. Wanda Kennedy called on the President of Literific to announce the rules. Like a good boy, the President did. And we stuck to a good old Literific tradition of having 10 minutes for guest speakers and 7 minutes for student speakers, with points of information being offered throughout. And a port fine for swearing, which is never going to be enforced. Bertie Ahern was then called upon to officially take the chair and give his opening remarks. He welcomed everybody to the debate and thanked the organisers for the invitation and the work gone into setting up the event. He then welcomed the speakers and called for the vote of prior opinion. Whoever wrote this did not put in actually the vote, so I have no indication of how it went, but the proposition of one. First in proposition was guest speaker Emma de Souza. She criticised the lack of meaningful representation for Northern Ireland in the Republic's media and government, and the failure of successive Irish governments to genuinely include Northern voices, emphasising the superficial commitment and promises made. She pointed out the absence of Northern voices in political dialogue, such as members of the Seanad, can't think of who she's talking about there, not having a position there, and civic spaces, contributing to a sense of othering experienced by people from up here. First in the opposition was Tom Burns. Wait for everybody, Tom. There we are. He reflected on the evolving relationship between Northern Ireland and the Republic, particularly in the context of Brexit. He acknowledged the initial feeling of being neglected by both parties, Ireland and Great Britain, but highlighted how the Brexit process had brought Ireland to an active role, advocating for Northern Ireland's interests and preventing a no-deal Brexit that could lead to violence. He had one question asked, which he declined. This would cause issues down the line.
Not true.
Second on the proposition was Sinead Scullion, a student at Trinity College Dublin, sadly. She reflected on the perception of Northern Ireland by the Republic of Ireland, emphasising the sense of being forgotten or overlooked. She shared personal experiences and anecdotes, highlighting the lack of awareness among Southerners about history, struggles, and day-to-day life in Northern Ireland. And she reflected on the perception of Northern Ireland by the Republic of Ireland, emphasising the sense, there's no full stop in this, of being forgotten or overlooked. Also shared a personal experiences and anecdotes, and this is just repeating it here again and again. Thank you. Our president wrote this, by the way, I should say. Second, the opposition was Ian Marshall, OBE, which is put in there. He provided a historical context for the complex relationships since 1921 and emphasised moments of diplomatic efforts and increased cooperation. He pointed out various collaborative initiatives across sectors such as health, education, tourism and sports, showcasing ongoing connections between the two regions. While acknowledging occasional instances of the Republic turning a blind eye, the Speaker contended that this behaviour is typical of a neighbouring country, looking out for the interests of their own interests rather than outright forgetting. He urged self-reflection, concluding that the Republic has not deserted or neglected Northern Ireland. Third in the proposition was President Emeritus Talta McSparran. There we are. She highlighted the Republic of Ireland, in particular Dublin, had forgotten Northern Ireland. She criticised the Republic's focus on Dublin, inadequate funding for regions like Donegal, which provoked former President Emeritus Daniel McCormick to cheer at that point. She criticised the Republic's focus on Dublin and perpetuated stereotypes about unionists and a lack of meaningful dialogue or cooperation. Despite some efforts mentioned by the opposition, she noted that these actions are insufficient, leaving Northern Ireland feeling neglected or overlooked by the Republic. She She was enthusiastic to hear from Eamon O'Keefe, is that right? There we are, TD, that the Republic was rolling out fibre broadband across Donegal, responding with, yay. He was next to follow. He highlighted historical efforts by the Republic to engage with Northern Ireland, even in the face of repeated rejections. He discussed positive interventions, such as opposing conscription during World War II. He acknowledged the challenges, but emphasised ongoing efforts, referencing provisions in the Good Friday Agreement. At this point, Mr. Dermot Hamill, HLM, asked a question and was... HLM was, and then was proceeded to be violently murdered in front of everybody with that withering put down. We had to scrape his charred remains off the ground at the end. And then was called for increased cooperation between the Republic and Northern Ireland. The final speaker for the proposition was Steve Aiken, OBE, MLA, HLM. He challenged the lack of attention and support for Northern Ireland from the Republic and cited examples such as the Shared Island Fund not benefiting projects in Northern Ireland and the disconnect between Dublin and areas outside of N50. At this moment, a bespectacled individual just put up his hand and asked for a point of order. He was slapped down with violence by Steve Aiken with the words, quote, "Not in my chamber, sunshine," end quote. He expressed a desire for improving understanding and collaboration, but not with Tom Burns, and extended a hand of friendship to everyone, but not Tom Burns, and emphasised common challenges like transportation and energy, and required joint efforts from the benefit of everyone involved. The final speaker for the opposition was Sebastian Fulmer, former auditor of the HIST, sadly. He argued that the dreams of a united Ireland persists among many, but notes that the failure of successive governments of the Republic led to a sense of decay, end quote. He contended that while the Republic is facing various crises, this doesn't equate to forgetting Northern Ireland. He criticised the lack of education about the North, pointing out issues such as homelessness and social inequality. And he further emphasised care and connection between people on both sides of the borders, shared experiences such as rugby, end quote. Following the debate and questions from the House, vote and speakerability took place. There were X votes for the proposition, X votes for the opposition, and X for the abstentions. And I believe the proposition had it. Following this, the chair, Bertie Ahern, rose to give his closing remarks, and what remarks they were. He expressed gratitude for the lively debate and commended all the speakers, noting that he refrained from sharing his views until after the vote, and then he gave his views. He reflected on his own political experiences, emphasising the importance of understanding Northern Ireland's complexities. He discussed the challenges faced in achieving North-South cooperation and expressed optimism for younger generations to build a better society. And then he talked a lot about everyone forgetting Dublin, and this went on for a very long time. And then concluded by wishing the President and participants well and called upon the President to give some closing remarks. The President thanked the teams from the HIST for assisting in organising the event, as well as Cara Hunter MLA for kindly sponsoring it. He thanked Bertie Ahern for chairing the debate. He concluded by noting that we have achieved speakers from both sides of the border, both unionist and nationalist, and from both debating societies. He then called on Dermot Hamill, HLM, to announce the afters, which was held at Kelly's Cellars, and then everyone swarmed around Bertie to get photos. Do I take the minutes as read? Aye.
Thank you for that, Mr. Secretary, and welcome everyone to the 16th ordinary meeting of the 175th session for the motion, "This House believes society has strayed too far from God." Firstly, do we have any council announcements? Mr. Hamill?
So as you know, I'm a social officer. We will be going to Lavery's tonight after the debate. Oh, alright, £6 a pint. You're very welcome to buy me one. We have a space booked, so whenever you land down, tell them that you have a booking for my name. If you're down there before me, don't really know where the space is. It's somewhere in the back to keep you away from the general public. We also, on the 25th of March, if you haven't heard already and haven't bought your ticket, you're letting me down, have the annual Conversazione, our formal. So it's in the Ulster Reform Club, a very lofty and fancy venue. It's got great food. We went there last week for lunch. Unreal. Our members of the society also went and tasted the wine that's going to be on offer. Apparently very nice. So, you know, it shall be a great night. There'll be an afters, there'll be a lot of drink consumed, or non-alcoholic beverages, if that's your tipple of choice. Also, on the, I think it's the first weekend or second weekend, first weekend of March. There is also the UCD second weekend of March. There's also the UCDIV, thanks Talja, the Vice President's Cup. If anyone would like to take part in that, it's a British parliamentary style debates competition. We paired up with a very senior speaker from the society, Talja. So feel free, if you'd like to sign up, come speak to me, President Toft or President Emeritus McSparran, to sign up for that. Finally, I think we have the Queen's IV coming up on the 23rd, 24th of March, right here in our lovely Queen's. That will be a very different style of competition. It'll be run like an ordinary kind of IV competition. There'll be hopefully 5 rounds of ordinary chamber style debating with 15 minutes prep to kind of allow a bit more fun. So there'll be students coming from hopefully right across the UK and Ireland. There's also a brilliant piss up out of after, which will be organised by me. So please come along, please sign up. Again, you'll be trained up for it if you'd like. You'll hopefully be paired up with someone that's pretty good if it's your first time speaking. And you're all very welcome to sign up. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Then just from me, on the 11th of March, we have a lit talk in the council chamber in the main Lanyon building with Sir Robert Buckland, who is chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee. It starts at 7 o'clock and spaces to that are limited given the room capacity. So please sign up. The official announcement will be going out tomorrow. And then there'll be a link in the Instagram bio to sign up to that, but make sure you do so early, as we all know there'll be all the kind of journalist and civic leader types also from outside the society going along to that, but we want to prioritise Literific members. And then there will be in 2 weeks time the Duffering competition, which is the competition for the best speaker of the house. It's a yearly event, and we're hoping to have a guest chair for that. If you'd like to sign up for that, anyone, no matter how long or short you've been in the society or however many debates you've attended or spoken at, you can sign up. Go through to the interest registration form in the bio and the Instagram account, and let us know that you want to be part of that. Given the amount of people already signed up and who we envisage will sign up, there will be either 1 or 2 pre-rounds to that, so sign up now. We can get you the details of those, because that will be outside normal society time. Does anyone else have any council announcements? Ellen?
The usual newspaper membership. I can't come up here and say the same thing every week. I'm running it's only a £5.
You get a discount on your formal too.
Yeah, you get a £5 off your formal if you pay the £5. So really, guys, yes.
Thank you. Tom?
I never did. I'm schools convener, also sunshine, I think that's the last Thursday. I'm very happy now to finalised this week that the Literific Schools debating competition is going to be held in the next few months. It'll be the biggest schools competition that we've ever had, and it doesn't affect any future university students. But it'll be held in Queen's on the 21st of March, with the final being held in Storm's Lawn Gallery on the 12th of April. So for that competition, it's going to be very, very big. There will be an awful lot of school children running around the place. So I will need as many hands on deck as possible to kind of corral them in the rooms and close doors behind them and make them follow the rules and things. So if anyone's interested in helping out at that event in terms of chairing debates and different things like that, getting people to and from places, please do come and talk to me and let me know, and we'll find a job for it.
Thank you. Anything else? No? Okay. Now we'll move on to private members' business, which is the section of the evening where you can raise anything you've seen in the news or something you're interested in and wish to put before the House. And just in advance, can I apologise to our guests? Mr. Maguire.
Luke Anthony Patrick Maguire. Now, I don't watch the news at all. I don't even have a TV. But someone keeps on telling me something happened in the Devonish. Could you people please enlighten me? I don't spend much time on the internet. I speak to people. But they see people bringing up this thing. Someone's granny or something done something. Some married men were very unhappy. Someone said something about it was really baby oil. But can someone please clarify?
Thank you.
If you're not watching the news, nobody wants to disturb your innocence.
Maybe we could take.
Talk to your mammy about it.
So, Luke, what you missed was the first event of the year, the Literific's first karaoke. So I'm sorry you missed it. Hopefully see you at the next one.
Anything else on this? Thank God. Does anyone have any other piece of private members' business? Tom first.
It's slightly less chaotic news meeting than what happened at 7 on Saturday. The House of Commons seemed to kind of collapse in itself yesterday over some very, very arcane parliamentary procedure, and there's a bunch of really sad people who think it's pretty parliamentary procedure. They don't have anything to think about the SNP Conservative Labour splits over the speakers' meetings.
Anything on this? Matthew?
Very briefly, just want to say that as a complete nerd whenever it comes to things like constitutional law, parliamentary procedure, and as union speaker at the Student Union Council, I absolutely enjoyed yesterday. Like that was just a brilliant day for me.
Anything else on this, Max?
I think the main problem with it isn't necessarily the fact that Labour motions were tabled. It was the fact that it was derailed a day that was specifically assigned for the SNP, and it turned into a Labour opposition day, which they would have obviously gone the day afterwards. So I can understand why the SNP are kind of angry about it. But if it had been any other amendment, I don't think we would have seen this sort of reaction.
Yep. Anyone else on this? Any other pieces of private members before I move on? Go ahead.
Yes, so the results are in for the Russian presidential election. For those of you who have not been keeping up, Russia is electing its president soon, and nominations were open until last Saturday. The official candidacies are in. Only one person received enough petitions to get in.
German.
And it was the Lord Bishop of Kildare, Benton. No, obviously Vladimir Putin has surprisingly had a lucky break and is the only candidate to have received enough petitions to become president. And conveniently enough, a man called Alex sort of keeled over in a prison after being frozen for several hours in what was definitely not an assassination. So, what do we feel about free and fair elections, guys?
Anything on this, James?
Well, we're Literific, we don't do free and fair. I will say that there are other presidential candidates here. There's some exciting options. You've got the Communist Party, who are pro-war. You've got the Liberal Democrats, who are neither liberal nor Democrats, but like our own. They're pro-war. And then you've got a Liberal Party, who are pro-war. So, I'm not sure what everyone thinks they vote for, but yeah, there's a lot of choice there.
I understand what I said.
Cormac.
I would just like to say about Alexei Navalny now. For anyone who doesn't know about him, he's presented by our media as sort of being like a liberal anti-Putin or the opposition, as if he's a big politician. He's actually a very, very small politician, but also it's surprising that our media is so pro him, considering, well, he's dead now. He's anti-Islam, he's anti-gay, he's anti like nearly anything that's sort of progressive. The idea that our media is presenting him as like a sort of anti-Putin freedom person is completely ridiculous. And you know what? It's not even the saddest thing if he did get killed by Putin.
Close to that.
Whoa! We're not choosing me.
Yeah. Anyone else on this?
Okay, I can follow now.
No? Okay, we'll move on. Unfortunately, I apologise to guests again. This is the President's questions, which you can ask me anything, and I prefer relevant professional questions, please. Thank you. Yes?
Mr. President, how many times did you say the word conference today?
Hundreds, if not thousands. So, for a bit of context, me, Tom, and Dermot went down to the International Convention and Conferences Association conference, where the society was asked to go up against Ulster's Debating Society on a very long motion about greenwashing in conferences. Do you have the motion?
No, you were saying
It was basically that the conference industry is inherently unsustainable, and that attempts to reduce its carbon footprint is just greenwashing. Is the long and short of the motion. Tom spoke for the opposition in what was a very well attended debate by members of the conference. It was the last item of business on their agenda, and it was still really well attended, and we got some fantastic feedback. Tom spoke amazingly. We ended up winning this afternoon, and
How big was the margin?
it was almost unanimous. There was only a few for the other side, which was quite good to see, and maybe perhaps represents the start of a QUB and UU rivalry in which we haven't seen before. But in answer to your question, I've said the word conference probably 1,000 times today, given that it was a conference for conferences, which was the most peculiar thing about it, but it was a good day all the same. Anything else?
Now, obviously, because this is a serious debate, it requires a very serious question. Do you prefer your cookies crunchy, or do you prefer them soft?
Soft. Anything else? Thank you very much. We're going to move on. So we'll go to the vote of prior opinion now, which is the bit on how you believe about the motion. So just so any new members are aware, and I guess we vote on the prior opinion before the motion to see how the House feels, and then after we have a vote on speaker ability. So the motion is, this House believes society has strayed too far from God. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your hand now. James. 25. All those against the motion, please raise your hand now. And if there are any abstentions? One. Can we get the vote of prior opinion, please, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, there were 25 votes for the proposition, 17 votes for the opposition, and 1 abstention. So by light and value margin, the proposition has it.
Now, before we welcome the first speaker, I'm just going to run rules from the evening. A full list of rules through our standing orders is available on our website, but here are a basic overview. Each speech is 7 minutes long for students and 10 minutes long for guests, with the first and last minute being protected time. The end of the first minute of protected time and the start of the final minute of the speech will be signalled by the bell, which means you can only offer points of information to any of our speakers tonight in the middle section of their speech, which is as normal. To POI, raise your hand and say point of information on that point, or simply POI. Please keep your POIs to 10 seconds long. I will cut you off if you break that. And no barracking, meaning wait at least 15 seconds after giving a POI to give another one, or 15 seconds after someone else has given one. Once you've made your POI, you cannot go back and forth with the speaker. Speakers you can decline or accept at any time, or you can just ignore them if you wish. If you need to leave the room at any time, do so quietly between speeches. Do not leave or re-enter the room whilst the speaker is speaking. Remember that any noise from outside does travel whilst you're out there talking. None of us want to hear you, so keep it down. Lastly, no swearing. If a speaker swears, they will be fined a bottle of port to be presented at the next ordinary meeting. But tonight, we're pleased to have 2 guest speakers with us who each offer up to 10-minute speeches. The first guest is Michael Kelly, who is a journalist and social and religious affairs correspondent and former editor of the Irish Catholic. And we also have Mary Lou McShane, who is currently the QUB Humanist Chaplain, a volunteer school speaker for Humanist UK, and a non-religious wedding, funeral and naming ceremony celebrant. Thank you, and I'm delighted to welcome the first speaker for the proposition, Michael Kelly.
Mr. President, thank you very much. This is the first time I've spoken at a university debating society in over 20 years, and I'm glad to hear that alcohol is still so much a part of this way of life. One's very disappointed when one reads in the newspapers, you know, that students nowadays have become very prudish and priggish, so it's good to know that that's not the case. I'm delighted to be here tonight to speak on this proposition that this House believes that society has moved too far from God. We live in what the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor has described as the age of authenticity, characterised by increased secularisation, a scepticism towards authority, and a quest for individual meaning-making and free choice. We've shifted from a society where belief in God was unchallenged and indeed unproblematic to one in which it is understood as one opinion among others, indeed an option among others. Belief in God is no longer axiomatic. There are other alternatives. God is dead, said our old friend Nietzsche. And yet, even Nietzsche knew that the concept of equality of souls before God, I quote, furnishes the prototype of all theories of equal rights. Nietzsche was right. Without God, where would the thought of equality come from? Outside of belief in God, the understanding of unique human dignity is not self-evident. Approaching the world from a purely atheistic, Darwinian perspective, it seems much more self-evident that people are not equal. A brief look at human history testifies to the dire consequences of the rejection of the belief of equality before God. The 20th century stands as the great experiment in replacing God as the source of all life. And what was the result? The crematoria and the gas chambers at Auschwitz, Birkenau, Dachau, and Birkenwald, described as the most terrifying Holocaust in the history of humanity. Tens of millions of people were slaughtered in the name of replacing God with the state in Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, China, Cambodia, North Korea, and many other countries. I recently had the pleasure of visiting friends in Albania, famously the world's first atheist state, where the socialist dictator Enver Hoxha ordered state atheism, and many believers were killed out of hatred for their faith, and they died the most appalling deaths. When that regime fell, not a single church was left standing, and yet Hoxha is dead, and the faith rose again. In Albania, I visited a scrapyard in the capital Tirana, which is an unlikely tourist attraction. It's where all the socialist era statues were dumped. And one of the beautiful things about being there and seeing the defeat of that is you can see in the distance in the capital the cross above the cathedral, the reconstructed cathedral. The 20th century saw the emergence of some of the most wicked ideologies in human history. Communism, National Socialism, Fascism, Maoism, Stalinism, etc. These regimes sought to replace God by making the state absolute and making human rights subject to the whim of the state. But Christianity teaches that human rights come not as a gift from the state or of an international treaty, but directly from the hands of God. In a provocative editorial a little while back, the Guardian newspaper, no friend to religion, asked bluntly, is the end of Western Christianity in sight? No religion is now by far the largest single identification in England and Wales. The census indicates that in Ireland, both north and south, it's on a similar journey. The Guardian went on, and I quote, contemporary humanists, just like the Christians of previous generations, believe in reason, fairness, freedom and decency. But they no longer have, the Guardian went on, a set of religious stories and rituals with which to justify these beliefs and charge them with emotion, end quote. The Guardian went on to say a post-Christian Europe will of course have a morality, but it won't be a Christian morality. It will likely be less universalist. The idea that people have some rights just because they are human and entirely irrespective of merit certainly isn't derived from observations of the world. It arose out of Christianity, no matter how much Christians have in practice resisted it, end quote from The Guardian. That bastion of liberal sensibilities observed that human rights could become vulnerable in an entirely post-Christian environment. This century, The Guardian said, will be one in which humanity faces gigantic challenges brought about by our own success in colonising this planet. Global warming and the still present threat of nuclear destruction both need a set of global solidarity to overcome and a vision of humanity. If Christianity no longer can supply that, what will, The Guardian concluded? What indeed? We also know that religion is good for you. It's good for individuals and it's good for society. According to the most recent research from Tilda in Trinity College, studying ageing and ageing well, religious people live happier, healthier, and longer lives. Sociologically, religion is associated with higher rates of marriage, lower rates of divorce, higher rates of fertility, as we head, particularly in Europe, into a demographic crisis, improved mental health, lower rates of crime, lower rates of substance abuse, higher levels of charitable giving and voluntary work. Not long before he died in 2013, Seamus Heaney told an interviewer in a series of revealing talks, quote, "The biggest shift in my lifetime has been the evaporation of the transcendent from all our discourse and our sense of human destiny. More bewildering still," he added, elaborating on what this evaporation of the transcendent means for a person's inner life. He said, I quote, "In exile into a universe with no up or down, no internalized system of moral longitude or latitude, no sense of a metaphysical roof over our heads," end quote. Heaney was referring, of course, to the growing lack of any ultimate framework or structure of meaning for our lives or any reliable moral compass. In a world far from God, people are tempted to focus on the immediate because they feel they have no larger perspective. Nature abhors a vacuum, of course, and worryingly, a society that loses sight of God always finds worse substitutes, ideologically and personally. At an ideological level, as I've said, tens of millions of people were sacrificed on the altar of replacing God with the state. On the individual level, Ireland without God is a very, very grim place. Rates of suicide and self-harm are almost off the scale.
Ireland with God was a very, very grim place. You know, babies were kept in septic tanks. The Catholic Church very much kept women under the thumb. Are you really saying that that's much better than Ireland now, where a much more progressive and liberal society?
No, the past was certainly not all perfect, far from it. I mean, one of the worst things about Christianity is how often it can be inadequately lived. But Ireland now ranks as fourth highest of cocaine users on the planet. Not a sign of a very happy people, I would suggest. Violent crime, sexual assaults, and homicide are trending upwards. And the number of people saying that they feel lonely all of the time in Ireland is 13%. 33% of people say they feel lonely a lot of the time. Dr. Vivek Murthy is the US Surgeon General, and last year he published an 85-page report on what he described as a new epidemic. He wrote, quote, "Our epidemic of loneliness and isolation has been an underappreciated public health crisis that has harmed individuals and societal health. Our relationships are a source of healing and well-being hiding in plain sight, one that can help us live happier, more fulfilled, and more productive lives," he said. The findings show that loneliness is as bad for you as smoking. Apologies for some of the smokers here, but we all know that it's not good for us. He cites the antidote to the crisis as a need to rebuild the social fabric of society through social connections. Ladies and gentlemen, I propose to you that the key way to rebuild that social fabric, ensuring that human rights continue to be universal rather than the whim of politicians, resist totalitarianism, and increase human happiness, is our belief in the transcendence. Society has indeed moved too far from God with dire consequences.
Thank you, Michael, and can I welcome our second guest to open the case for the opposition, Mary Lou McShane.
My most recent debating experience is even further away than yours by some miles, but at least the Christian Brothers School isn't here, as far as I know, to give me a really tough time. Okay, so I could just say fairly simply that as a humanist I don't believe in God, and so therefore how can society, which is generally accepted as a real thing, stray away from something that isn't. And if it did, it might not matter. To be honest, that would be a pretty accurate reflection of my feelings, but it is a bit flippant, and it's a failure to treat the topic and, much more importantly, those here present with respect. The motion, I think, is intentionally a somewhat slippery statement, requiring definition of almost every word in it in order to address it, not least the word God. Do we mean God? Do we mean religion? Do we mean the representatives of God? What do we mean when we talk about God? So a lot of the interpretation and the words, the slipperiness of the concept is nonetheless very powerful. I think I said that wrong. I said a lot of the interpretation of the motion depends on belief, in itself a slippery concept to contend with, but very powerful nonetheless. And a lot of my feelings about this go back to beliefs. Britain's first female Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, I think Baroness Thatcher is the right title, is credited rightly or wrongly with saying there is no such thing as society. She also did apparently believe in God, quoting on entry to Downing Street St. Francis' famous prayer that asks for the ability to bring into your and others' lives forgiveness, love, hope, faith, peace, light and joy. History will judge how well she did on that one, but certainly those qualities would strengthen any society whose members were fortunate enough to experience them daily. There were many major differences in belief between myself and Mrs. Thatcher. This is only one. However, up until that time, there weren't many of many country premiers who denied the idea of society. In fact, there's not many who deny the idea of God, certainly not in the States. You wouldn't get many votes out of that. So beliefs come from the story we tell ourselves, about others and the world. Beliefs are our attempt to rationalise life and events and to soothe our uncomfortable feelings. You referenced suicide in your speech, which I thought was interesting. I worked in suicide prevention at one stage, and certainly as a counsellor and therapist, people's beliefs, whether I agree with them or not, share them or not, is neither here nor there. They're terribly important when you're trying to work with how people are and when they're suicidal. And when somebody is lying on the grave of their mother in the middle of the night, telling you that the way for them to be with their mother is to kill themselves, it becomes very difficult to work with their beliefs. The belief in an afterlife, I would say, is a wee bit difficult, to put it mildly. I choose to believe myself in a society which is made up of people and accept that some of them believe in God or gods and wish to follow the teachings of other humans who have interpreted for them God's will. The story I tell myself is one of connection. Humankind depends on humanity and kindness. Without adequate proof of the existence of gods, we really ought to build our society based on well-being for all. I also believe that the vast majority of people who believe in God are motivated by and attracted to good, and that is how they try to live their lives. They see God as the personification of good, yet another slippery word to define. I'm not completely sure about some of the televangelists, but that is another topic altogether. So, I'm not an expert on the evolution of society. However, it seems to me that it has developed strongly in most places in recent times into a force for good. It has always decided what is good and bad, what is socially acceptable, what we are allowed to do and not. A few hundred years back, I could have ended up burned at the stake for denying God's existence. Or burnt as a witch, whatever, you pays your money, you take your choice. Now it causes only mild consternation for a very few. Social mores are changing all the time and quite rapidly in my lifetime. School and what we are taught form much of the basis of the story we tell ourselves. My father recollected an out-of-control teacher clouting the whole class on the side of the head in turn. My dad ducked, and the unfortunate boy next to him got thumped twice. He said that boy suffered from what to him looked like brain damage in later life. And I think my dad actually felt some guilt about that. Yesterday I spoke at a primary school assembly, and the head teacher remarked that I and the other speaker both mentioned kindness, which she segued nicely into the song they then rendered, which was all about kindness. Afterwards, I discussed this with my partner, and neither of us remember any adult mentioning kindness throughout the entirety of our school days. In the span of 2 lifetimes, society brought about these changes. Social pressure and indeed the resulting legislation means you cannot with impunity get paid for brutal behaviour towards children. And this reflects a shift in power. Power is another critical word when considering this motion as proposed. In that motion, where does the power lie? I don't recall much mention of God when legislation came in to forbid drunken driving and thus created a new social mores that kept us all safer. The groupthink was, we'll all be better off. Society as a group endeavours and strives mostly to be good. If that is synonymous with God in your mind, then we cannot be moving away from that particular construct. If good is a separate idea, then whether or not we stray away from a deity while seeking out the good in ourselves and others is irrelevant. The stats would suggest that in many places a large chunk of the population is managing very well to be, as humanists say, good without God. The good that the mechanism of society can create is very concrete and real. It plays out in daily life and it sees the enhancement of life for humans. The odds favour your child not being physically brain damaged at school or run over by a drunk on the way home. Within society we have, as well as the inherent power of a large number of like-minded individuals, structures that carry immense power and carry out the functions that we mostly really want to happen, or at least are content to acquiesce to. Policing, lawmaking, creating the physical structures we feel we need to succeed and be happy in life are effectively run by subgroups with our consent. Because we gift institutions power, they sometimes forget who they are there to serve. And as we progress, we may need to change them to make them answerable to the general good rather than serve the purposes of a minority. Society is not always of one voice, but people, I believe, are intrinsically good and wish the best for each other. And that's probably a good reason not to ever watch the news, because it never starts with, there are 8 billion people on the planet and today most of them had an okay day and were quite nice to one another. And that is one of the problems about the media. It's a particular group of people that need to be addressed, I think. Society is not always of one voice, but people, I believe, are intrinsically good. Every so often dissenting voice... Sorry?
On that point?
Yeah.
You're saying society doesn't follow one voice. Does that not then create exactly what they're saying? A unifying force, God, is what society follows, and you're saying society is more individualistic.
Which version of God are you following?
I just go back and forth, I can't talk.
Yeah, okay. Well, that will rather depend on which version of God or which iteration of God and gods you follow. If you go back far enough, God said, let's sacrifice a few thousand people. Go back a little bit further, let's burn people who don't believe in me. God, as it stands for a lot of people, tells them that they ought to do certain things. I don't think God is really necessarily a unifying voice, unless, as some very extreme religions would like, we all follow their interpretation of God. And the difficulty with God is he, she, it does not speak directly to us. It speaks through a human being, and the Bible, all the holy books are written by people. So, you know, how truthful you feel it is, or how accurate or useful it is, depends on many things. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to have to run through this now. Right, where did I go to? Every so often dissenting voices appear that challenge social norms, and it is how we deal with those voices that the real growth can be found. In Victorian times and later, awkward wives who did not bow to convention could easily be locked away for decades as mentally unstable. A current controversy that challenges us to step up and decide what kind of society we want to have is probably the acceptance or otherwise of trans people. It's tough at the moment, but one day soon I expect we will establish as a social norm in ourselves the capacity to look at a child, accept that little person, and not have a pressing need to label them. As a species, we take a long time to come to maturity, and some of us never really make it. We're dependent for a long time, and society encouraged us at one time to strive for a second stage, which was pretty much codependency, often within tight religious structures. Then independence became the other order of the day. Mrs. Thatcher was a big fan, and personal responsibility is indeed a useful thing. Now I sense we're working towards interdependence, a community-based approach that respects one another's skills. Society has not stayed, wandered or meandered. Am I done? I have that be finished?
1 second.
I have 1 second. Not sure what the rules are. Worse with religion. Society has not stayed, wandered or meandered away from God. The members of it see God as a representation of good are working often tirelessly towards that end. Those for whom God is not the definition of good are also seeking a human good and better social structures. Some of the constructs within society work against that aspiration and will in time be modified. That's the history of society and will almost certainly be its future. So I think we're all working towards a common good, however you define that. I don't think it has anything to do with God.
Thank you for that, Mary Lou, and can I welcome Risha and Gerard to continue the...
It is my belief that every day we stray further from God's light, though this may be true of some more than others, as demonstrated by the goings-on at Devonish this past week. In the past 3 decades, society has undergone a profound change. We're all familiar with, I assume, and accept as fact, the idea that any female born after 1993 can't cook. All they know is McDonald's, charge their phone, twerk, be bisexual, eat hot chocolate and lie. All of which are in direct conflict with the state of nature and God's creation. Let us pause for a moment and consider, how many of us actually think about God in our everyday lives? With the exception of the likes of Jack Steele and Luke Maguire, I think it to be exceptionally few of us. In the rush to meet deadlines, fulfill obligations and pursue personal ambitions, how many of us really take the time to reflect on our relationship with God and our faith or lack thereof? As we navigate through the intensity and chaos of our daily existence, how often do we pause to offer gratitude for the blessings bestowed upon us, or seek guidance from a higher power in times of need and inner turmoil?
On that point?
No, thank you. Let us honestly confront this question. In a world that has become consumed by materialism and self-gratification, have we strayed too far from God? I think yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has become increasingly evident that we are drifting further away from the divine path laid out for us by our Creator. Our society, once grounded in the principles and tenets of religion, has now veered dangerously off course, distancing itself from the very essence of God's teachings. We were made in God's image, intended to live in harmony with his will and purpose. Yet as time progresses, we find ourselves increasingly alienated from him, straying from the path he intended for us. The core principles of religion, the values of compassion, justice, and the sanctity of life, seem to have been forgotten amid the hustle and bustle of the modern world.
On that one?
No, thank you. Consider the principles laid out in the Old Testament that were meant to guide us. Tikkun olam, the concept of fixing the world. Tzedakah, the obligation to be charitable and to give to those in need. And pikuach nefesh, the imperative to save a life. These are the very foundations upon which our moral compass should be built upon. In every decision we make and in every moment of our waking lives, the furthering of these principles was intended to be at the forefront of our mind. In our modern society, these principles often take a backseat to materialism, individualism, and self-interest.
On that one.
No, thank you. Our society is in a state of moral decay, symptomatic of our departure from the principles of righteousness and virtue. The rising crime rates, fueled by greed and selfishness, stands as a stark reminder of our collective moral decline. It is evident that we have strayed too far from the moral compass that once guided our actions, and it is imperative that we heed the call to return to the path of righteousness laid out by our religious teachings.
On that point,
I'm going to regret this, yeah.
Israel, one of the meanings is we who wrestle with God. Whether these people believe in God or do not want to believe in God, they still wrestle the same. And is that not within the permissive will of God? And is the loneliness epidemic not exactly showing that people always have a relationship with God, good or bad?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I'm a Jew, so personally I think arguing with God is a core part of my religion and my religious experience. I'm not quite sure what else to say to that. A great man once said that the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. And I believe that this is true of our faith also. We've become corrupted and detached from our place in God's creation. The Industrial Revolution, with all of its advancements and conveniences, has brought with it a profound disconnect from the natural world. We are no longer in touch with the beauty and sanctity of creation, and consequently we find ourselves dissociated from and alienated from God himself. Our disconnect with God may also be linked to environmental degradation, as we appear to have forgotten the importance of stewardship of the natural world and instead neglected to take care of God's creation. Deforestation, pollution, species extinction, and climate change all indicate towards a total disregard for the natural world, as we have strayed from the principles of environmental responsibility laid out by religious teachings. In this era of technological advancement and material abundance, it is no wonder that we are facing a crisis of faith. We have strayed too far from the good life that God intended for us. We are consumed by consumerism, distracted by the superficial, and blinded by our own desires. In our pursuit of progress, we have forgotten the essence of what it means to truly live according to God's will. Additionally, in our quest for progress and prosperity, we often overlook the profound impact that our disconnection from spirituality has on mental health. The rise in rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide in our society is not merely a coincidence, but rather a reflection of the spiritual void that plagues all of our souls. As we chase after material wealth and external validation, we neglect the well-being of our inner selves, leading to a sense of emptiness and despair. Research consistently demonstrates the therapeutic benefits of spirituality and religious practices in promoting mental wellness and resilience. Yet, in our modern world, these vital sources of solace and strength are often relegated to the sidelines. It is time for us to recognise the intrinsic link between spirituality and mental health, and to prioritise the cultivation of inner peace and spiritual fulfilment as essential components of a truly healthy society.
On that point?
But it is not too late for us. No. We have the power to realign ourselves with God's purpose, to rekindle the flame of faith that burns within each of us. We must strive to reconnect with the divine, to embrace the principles of compassion, justice, and love that lie at the heart of all religious teachings. Let us heed the call to return to God's light, to walk once more in his footsteps. For only by rediscovering our connection to the divine can we hope to find true fulfillment and meaning in our lives. Thank you.
To continue the case of the opposition.
Thank you. I believe it is important at the pretty much halfway mark of this debate that we do actually define what exactly society is. Now, we've gone on a lot about the social fabric of society, but society is also defined by institutions. Yes, social, but also governmental institutions primarily, because that is generally what we use to define our culture. It's government, it's the courts and justice system, it is our police force, and all of these systems within the United Kingdom or the Republic of Ireland, wherever you go, are often defined by the morals we find within our religious texts, primarily speaking, the Ten Commandments. For example, thou shalt not kill, a prime principle of our justice system, I would say. Or the fact that you love thy neighbour, or even the fact that in recent regards to fight the rise in crime, which I believe would probably be more associated with the fact that we have the highest level of inequality in recent memory since pre-war era, is community policing, which I believe follows the tenets of Christianity of love thy enemy, and if he was to smack me in my face, I would turn the other cheek. I would say that. But equally, regardless of whether or not you believe in religious morals, I believe it is important that regardless of whether you believe in a God, your morality has been implicitly affected by religious teachings, whether you wanted to or not. I was thinking about the fact that you were describing the stories of your time in primary school, and whenever reflection on my time in primary school, I remember having to pray to God every morning in primary school class. I remember assemblies specifically spouting ideas of Christianity. And whether or not I believe in a God, I personally do, that will affect how I view the world. That's how I view right and wrong. And even if you are sitting in this room now and you are an atheist, your moral compass has been affected by that. And you have been aligned in a way that regardless of whether you believe in a God, you act in a way that follows the teachings of religion.
On that point?
On that point?
Sure.
Morality existed before the existence of the Christian God. Before it even existed, we weren't tearing each other apart. We were working in communities. So So basically there is more biological sense for why we work all together instead of essentially the sky god telling us what to do.
And actually, you raised an important point that I feel was failed to be addressed. The proposition tonight has focused solely on Christianity, which I believe is a bit disingenuous. And Abrahamic religions. But it is important to mention that there are multiple other religions, and I believe this is where the problem with the opposition's arguments lie. 37.2% of the country is atheist, yes. But let's rephrase that. 63.8% of the country who are a mixture of Christian, Hindu, Islamic, Judaist, all believe in a God and follow those principles on a daily basis. That's a majority of the country. So how could we have strayed away from God's teaching if the majority of the country appealed to his principles? Now, just thinking about that. And, but equally, because our society is based around social institutions that are rooted in religion, we cannot say that we have not been implicitly believed to follow God's teachings, whether or not we believe it or not. Which means we lead to one of two conclusions. One, that our society has not strayed away from God's teachings because of the simple fact that we implicitly follow it, whether we believe in their existence or not. Or two, that these teachings are not in line with God's teachings. In which case, we have not strayed further away. Strayed, as the wording of the question is that we've been further moving away. But the fact of the matter is, if we have been living in a society that has never worked within God's teachings, then we have not strayed further away at all. We have stayed at a standstill. So either way we broach this topic, the motion falls, surely. And I just want to move on to a couple of points made by our headline speaker, and the fact that the authoritarian state of fascism, of communism, never used religion to support their actions. Now, a very famous man called Patriarch Sergius of the Russian Orthodox Church from 1899 to 1944 swore fealty to the Soviet Union, and under his patriarchate used the Christian religion to endorse the Holodomor, the Communist Command economy, and several of the worst atrocities that the Soviet Union propagated. Now, in Nazi Germany, yes, they did try to get rid of the Christian church initially, for their own religion, bearing in mind, but equally after that failed, the Catholic and Protestant churches endorsed the Nazi regime after they were given, sure.
Are you forgetting the Confessing Church of Germany, which is a Protestant church that actively worked to distribute resistance material and campaign to get people out of camps?
Yes, but equally the majority of religion in the country was used as a tool to support the regime. The Catholic and Protestant churches even gave sermons that endorsed the practice of sending Jewish people to the concentration camps, which is an often underreported fact of history. Yes, there is an exception to the general rule, but that does not exclude the rule. And thus, I believe it is important to say tonight that the proposition will give you cherry-picked examples of history, of the fact that we have crime problems and that it's linked to religiosity, or somehow the fact that loneliness is linked to the fact that people have lost God. And I believe, quite like the speaker before this, that humanity is naturally good. And the fact of the matter is, altruism has increased. We have the record number of donations to the Red Crescent, an Islamic aid organization, and we also have the record number of Salvation Army. So surely, with this move towards religion, we have not strayed further from God. And I urge this House to drop this motion. Thank you.
just briefly like to reflect on what you said about Baroness Thatcher, who I think we can all agree is example that God does give us gifts. But tonight I was speaking from a Christian perspective, and before I proceed, I would like to make clear a very stark distinction between religion and God. We're talking about God and the character of God, not religion, with all due respect, Mr. Kieran. But society has strayed too far from the path of God. Jesus said there are two roads in life, the broad road and the narrow road. There are two destinies, heaven and hell. There are two ways to life, two masters, sin and God, truth and falsehood. I want you to think about which road you're on, but don't tell me until later on. I'd like to read briefly from Inferno 1 by Dante Alighieri. Canto 1 rather. Midway upon the journey of our life, I find myself within a dark forest, for the straightway path had been lost. For this generation, Dante's opening words will be all too relatable. The suffocating feeling of being completely lost, isolation, melancholy, anxiety, depression, nihilism, discouragement. The society that we live in has strayed so far from God that many feel that suffering will never cease. Now, Michael rightly drew attention to Nietzsche, who foreshadowed this present darkness with God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. Now, Nietzsche, as an atheist, did not seriously believe that there was a God who had been killed, rather that human beings had eroded the moral basis that society rested upon. We killed the concept of God. For even dear Fyodor Dostoevsky was willing to admit that without God there is no morality. Essentially, morality would have to be subjective. It would have to be culturally endowed. So, yes, there's a rudiment of it, but not the morality that God has so kindly given us. No, thank you, forgive me. A brief reflection of the world's most vain godless society, which Michael drew attention to, the USSR, led by Joseph Stalin, showed us what society without God is like. Stalin waged a holy war, introducing what is known now as the godless 5-year plan. Purging churches, destroying congregations, ostracizing believers, and murdering clergy in order to elevate the infallibility of the man-made socialist doctrine upon which his morality rested upon. Yes, sadly.
Franco's Spain used the power of religion and attack non-believers, led to mass executions, summary executions, torture of people. Surely, if Stalin is representative of atheism, is Franco not representative?
This debate's about God, not religion. So, unlike Nietzsche, who somewhat lamented this loss, Stalin simply sought to kill God. The old, hard totalitarianism had a vision for the world that required the complete eradication of Christianity. A 1937 survey of the Soviet population found that 57% self-identified as a religious believer. But this belief was considered unworthy by the Stalinist regime, and in that year alone, 1937, 85,000 Orthodox priests were murdered.
On that point?
Yes, sadly.
But aren't we saying that it's about God, not religion? So why do statistics about religion matter if they're not apparently...
Because this society, the godless society, is determining itself that it doesn't need God for morality. I'm going to expand on what God and his morality brings later on. I'm giving you an example of how a godless society has waged a war. Make faces all you want, but he's listening. And essentially... in the USSR, millions of Christians were persecuted. There's no specific number, but it ranges between 10 and 20 million. Murdered, tortured, imprisoned, exiled, beaten, thrown into camps, and martyred. By 1987, the New York Times reported, and I quote, Soviet officials have begun to admit that they may be losing the battle against religion. And the motion before the House today asks of God, and I remind the House that... I've lost my page, forgive me, 1 second. James Orson, this is you taking my speech and reading it before I give it to you.
There's like 10 words per page.
Yes, sorry, I'll give it.
Surely does that not suggest that actually God strayed away from the USSR rather than the other way around?
Honestly, I didn't listen to that because I was trying to find my page. So, anyway, whatever. I'm going to refer to Václav Havel now, who some of you will know from Czechoslovakia. And he said, very well, a person who lives only for his own comfort and survival, who is willing to live within a lie to protect that, is a demoralized person. Society has disregarded the generosity of Christ in favor of selfishness. We have replaced the altar of Jesus with that of the individual. And we've replaced the worship of God with the worship of ourselves. We have become so deeply concerned with our own self, our own well-being, our own finances, our own security, own entertainment, our own appearance. No, thank you. We are drowning society in an endless supply of pleasurable diversions. We have forgotten how to live in a way that God commands with modesty and humility. I wish to take up the point that you brought about the 10 Commandments. No, I'm not giving way. And there's a story where a child comes to God and he asks about how to get into the kingdom of heaven, and God lists the 10 Commandments. And then he says, well, I follow all that, so what do I do now? And he says, well, if you really want to, go away, sell all your possessions, give everything away, and live life like those who have nothing. Modern society bewitches us with the therapeutic promises of entertainment, pleasure, comfort, with online content, technology, alcohol, drugs, social media. I dare say that society fears of living a life for God because it comes from an obsession with pleasure. And there's a clear, evident fear about unsettling our man-made narratives that make us happy. It reminds me of the fallible maxim espoused by Huxley's great dictator. He said, essentially, that Christianity without tears is what society wants. And that is what those on the other side of this argument, whether they agree or not, are arguing for. Christianity without tears. The idea that there can't be suffering and God brings suffering is questionable. Suffering is an essential part of life. I just want to briefly refer to the story of the lost son. The son that, there's a story Jesus tells us in the Bible, the son who wants to take his inheritance money. And he asks his father for it, and his father gives it to him. He says, go, take your inheritance money. And he goes out and he lives a life and he parties and he makes friends and he spends all his money. And then Jesus continues, there's a famine across the whole country and he has no more money left. He has to resort to feeding pigs pods. And in that moment, he realizes in that moment that a life of service is better than a life of pleasure. And he goes back home and he says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And despite the manner in which he departed, his father embraces him and says, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. And the final thing I would like to leave you with is the concluding words of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's 1974 essay, live not by lies, pick up your cross, follow Jesus. It is up to us today to live not by lies, to speak for truth that defeats evil, courageously defend it, and ensure that the consequences are avoided. Matthew 10:22, you shall be hated by all men for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved.
Good people do not need religious scriptures to tell them to act responsibly, while bad people often craft them to design their own destinies. Proposition opposition members of the House, esteemed guests, my name is Henry Reardon, and I will be advancing the case of the opposition bench on the motion that this House believes society has strayed too far from God. I must warn you, I have opted to ground my arguments in an alternative, a bit left of field interpretation of the motion. So the motion reads that this House believes society has strayed too far from God. I contend that societal integration and dependence on a deity whose existence is not an axiom, as was so eloquently stated by the proposition, but in fact an unproven assertion, is not an inherently positive thing. I argue that we must not make this debate about whether or not we are far from God as a society, but rather is that distance a positive or a negative. So I will argue that we are not too far from God, because the further, the better. This is a much more relevant I'll come to you in a minute. This is a much more relevant clash, as it poses a much more wide philosophical question to the entire debate. This speech will consist of three major components. Firstly, I will provide direct responses to the proposition's strongest material, attacking both their mechanisms and the significance of the impacts that they discuss. Secondly, I will discuss my first point on the institutionalization of God and religion, the characteristic malice of those institutions. And finally, adjacent to my second argument, I will discuss the faux pas, disingenuous morality systems that are pervasive in a godly society. Before I launch into my responses, I need to give an essential element of analysis to frame this debate. One whose relationship with faith is fundamentally personal and individual and does not require the vector of religious establishment does not societally participate in the belief of a deity. If I am going home every night and saying my prayers, and those discussions are between me and God, and I don't bring it into my voting, into my politics, into my everyday life, I don't attend Mass, then that can't be classified as a godly relationship. Just want to make that clear. I think it's an important thing to say. So, let's give some rebuttal on the last three speakers. So, on the first speaker, we heard artistically constructed laments on the degradation of many moral societies. Mr. Speaker, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Cocaine use, depression, loneliness, all savage epidemics. However, we fail to hear a single concrete mechanistic link on how an increasingly godless society results in this amelioration. Correlation does not equal causation. Again, we hear a similar principle argument, and I just pose one question to the second speaker. I don't deny that our civilization and its future hang in the balance, but this reality hasn't occurred because of a departure from God. It's funny that you brought up the Industrial Revolution, because that represents a time in which the economic and legal establishment were so defined and intertwined with religion. Let me visualize that. Queen Victoria, the head of the Church of England, a sovereign anointed by God, abetting child slavery in coal mines and using the profits to build fancier gold chains on top of her churches. I don't think it gets more integrated than that. And finally, on the third speaker, making a difference between religion and God is not an apples and orange comparison. It's more comparing oranges to orange juice. And on the Stalin godless question that we heard, Tsar Nicholas II, Stalin's predecessor, ran a very godly society consisting of classism so brutal many categorize it as genocide. So the godly society was no pizza party.
On that point?
No, thank you. But I will come to the POI that we heard earlier that I did.
Well, speaking as a bad person, who genuinely, like, there's no better feeling than physically hurting someone. Beautiful. I'm someone who needs religion. I need an external factor to tell me what is right and wrong. Otherwise, you can only imagine the horrific exemption.
Well, I say the problem with your badness is if you're such an absurd nihilist skeptic and you really do get such a great satisfaction, such a great satisfaction from exacting harm in your fellow human being, I don't think you're going to find the arguments of the church that are found on no logic but more trust and not to be reductionist but vibes. I don't think you're going to find that convincing either. So, anyway, to launch into my first point on religious institutionalization, I'll be answering three questions. Firstly, what does institutionalization look like? Secondly, why is it guaranteed to occur in a godly society? And finally, why is this an abusive power dynamic? So, what exactly do these institutions look like? What form do they take? I assign them three major characteristics. Firstly, they promote pressure in social culture. Those who don't conform to the respective religious institution are ostracized, shunned, and excluded, both socially and economically. Businesses are less attractive if they don't conform to the given norms. I have relatives who grew up in the Catholic south of Ireland. Trust me, it really was not fun, especially when some of those relatives don't exactly have identity characteristics. It was very difficult to be a lesbian woman, for instance, in 1970s Catholic Ireland. B, their influence, these institutions' influence seeps into the political, the legal, and the economic. Religion institutions which have strong footings in courts and legislators, from corporations to corner shops alike. And then finally, they are man-made. It is man acting as the vector, it is man acting as the vessel, it is man calling the shots. So, why is this guaranteed to occur in a godly society? Say a society makes a collective agreement under their social contract to flatly observe standards of religion. They'll erect things like churches, physical symbols, religious scripture to have these defining features of institutionalization. That's what makes it tangible. That's what makes these beliefs real, communal, and valid to them. So, finally, why is this power dynamic abuse? Immediately, when we carefully consider the positions of these establishments, a problem is clear. Their authority is not ordained by the democratic populace or academic research or anything meritocratic. It hangs on the feather of the fear of the divine. Moving me into my final argument, which is our characterization of morality in this debate. Do we want our society to be moral, to act with good virtue, to act with ethics because they want to pay off some karmic pension in the afterlife, because they want to avoid hell, because they want to live up the good life in heaven? Or do we want our society, as Immanuel Kant says in his book, What We Owe to Each Other, do we want our society, as secular humanists advocate, to be good for the sake of goodness, to give for the sake of giving, and love for the sake of love? I'll conclude with this. Societies grow great when old men plant seeds of trees, the shade of which they know they will never sit in. Op takes this debate. Thank you.
Another round of applause for a maiden speaker. To continue against the proposition.
That's absolutely super. Good evening. It's great to be back at the Literific. And just from the get-go, I do want to define the concept of God. My conscience would be betrayed if I do not define it as the one and true living God, the Christian God, the one who's revealed himself in the 66 books of Scripture and in the face of the Lord Jesus Christ. But that's from the get-go. I have to define that, otherwise my conscience would be betrayed. Sorry, my Jewish friend. But the opposition would have you believe that within society, a godless society, will move towards the good, what's beautiful. But let me ask you, by what standard, rhetorically, by what standard do we define good? Where do we get our conception of good from? This is the fundamental issue at stake tonight, friends, our members of the House. What is good? They appeal to goodness with absolutely no foundation to do so. They appeal to goodness with no foundation to do so. It's only within the Christian theistic worldview that we have a foundation for good and we can move towards that good. The first speaker, I'm okay, thanks. The first speaker spoke wonderfully and explained why kindness is a beautiful virtue by which all humanity need to strive towards so. But I ask, why? Why would we do that?
On that point.
What's the point? What's the point? I'm okay, thanks very much. As an illustration I once heard, we have the flower of a Christian worldview. We've cut off its root, and at the minute we still enjoy the beauty of the flower. We still want to enjoy the beauty of kindness and looking after one another, but we've cut the root. Eventually that'll die. Let's see what society will look like 100 years down the line, when our Christian grandparents are gone, when the influence of morality is no longer within the minds of humanity. I'm okay, thanks very much. And okay, the definition of good which I heard was the enhancement of human life. Try and sell it to the Nazis. Try and sell it to Stalin. Try and sell it to people who commit crimes day in, day out. Try and sell it to someone who tries to force sex upon someone. I want to do it. I want to do it. What are you going to say to that? I don't think you should. No, we need objective morality. Try and sell it to someone who's going to kill your family. You're going to go, I don't really like you doing that. No, every single particle, every single longing within you knows deep down that it's wrong to kill someone, that the enhancement of human life is right and good to go forward. And I would question my dear friends here, why do they think that? And the Christian answers were made in the image of God. Each of us has a conscience. Each of us reflect our Creator and move towards the good. My friend, yeah.
So, look, I'm just a wee bit confused about it. Is that, okay, so we all agree when you do any one of those bad things, we all turn around and we look at the victim, say, and we look around and we go, oh, I don't feel so good about that. That doesn't really feel right. Is that a feeling? Is that coming from God, or where's your source? Where's the link?
No, what I'm saying is in this argument we're appealing towards the good. And my proposition this evening is we have no foundation for good outside of God. So by the irrationality of the contrary, it proves the position that God is there and we've strayed too far from him, because it is irrational to propose that we should move towards good when you have no foundation to do so. It's like sitting on a branch and saying this branch is so comfortable, it's brilliant, while sawing it off from the tree of which it's grounded towards.
On that point.
I'm okay, thanks very much. And this I think it was the second speaker perhaps mentioned the problem of evil and the crimes that's been perpetrated by religious groups or by anyone in particular. But the problem of evil within a worldview where there is no God is that there is no problem of evil, because ultimately we don't matter. Think about it. Think about this. There's no God and we're simply bags of cytoplasm floating on a rock around the sun. Then why does anything matter? Why does life have value? And the answer is it doesn't. But every single longing within you tells you that it does. And to address the second speaker's point that society has moved towards religion, therefore towards God, I think we know anecdotally that that's not true. If you are a Christian in today's society and you hold the views of scriptures, you are viewed as a wee bit of a dinosaur, to say the least, or a religious bigot. It's clear we haven't moved towards God. Only 3% of young adults aged between 18 and 25 across the United Kingdom attend church on Christmas Day. Maybe you were enjoying Christmas Day, that's okay. But anyways, But on that, sorry, I want to keep continuing on that point where we're moving more and more religious. I agree with you. Humanity is made to worship, and the fundamental issue which we were trying to explain was who we worship. When that's askew with, and when that's gone off course, when we worship created things rather than the Creator, that's why we get these issues that we tried to explain in regards to the loneliness epidemic and mental health. And I understand correlation doesn't equate causation, but I hope by the end of my next minute or so you'll get what I'm getting at. But yes, Henry mentioned, or the third speaker mentioned, that the distance we stray away from God is better. But by what standard? You have no basis to dictate what is better. What is better? What is worse in a worldview where there is no objective reality, no objective meaning, one by which we have to create our own purpose? Then my purpose is going to be different to yours. And if purpose and morality and meaning are simply human conventions, then we may as well close the literific debate and scrap it, because my convention is going to be different to your convention, and we'll never ever be able to agree with one another. But the reality is, we know that's not the case, that there is objective meaning and there's objective truth. I'm okay, thanks very much. I do want to close. Members of the House, it's evident that society has strayed too far from God. I don't need to mention the mental health epidemic or whatever's going on. You know it's the case. But if you'd rather a society that has no basis whatsoever for human rights, no basis for morality, no basis for logical debate, because what are laws of logic in a materialistic worldview? Are they just little things fuzzing in our head? No.
On that point.
No hope beyond the grave. That's another thing that no one's mentioned. We paint an image. I will talk, children's mental health is never been worse, and that should really grieve us. But what can we expect when we bring little ones into the world and we tell them, you know what, all you get is 60, 70 years of suffering, and afterwards it's just bleakness and darkness? That's what we've got when we've expelled the hope offered to us by the empty tomb. But if you want a world where there is ultimately no purpose, no objective meaning, no morality, where we move towards a good that's not defined by anything apart from our own bubbly thoughts, whilst also holding the contradictory view that we're simply just advanced biological computers, then vote against the proposition. But if you want a society where there is ultimate truth, where there is ultimate beauty, where there is ultimate justice, where love truly is the highest virtue, where our actions matter not just for now but in the life to come, then vote for the proposition. Because, members of the House, the most dangerous claim that anyone's ever believed is that Jesus really was who he said he was, that he really did die on the cross and he really did rise again, and that turns this world from a meaningless chaos into a design place. So vote for the proposition, but more than that, come home. Even this evening, come home to the one who made you and sent his son to save you. The light is on, the fire is lit, the table is set. You won't be met with scorn, but you'll be welcomed by his pierced hands. Let me close with a quote from St. Augustine. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until we rest in thee. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's give this a shot, shall we? Will you just begin the time whenever I start speaking? Okay, roger that, thank you. Okay, well, let's get off flying, shall we?
I'd like to start out by just saying that the proposition throughout this have tried to stop us from talking about values, stop us from trying to talk about different things, while simultaneously talking about values. They want us to only talk about God. They want to be disingenuous and try to lock us in. And the reasoning for this is because then it will make our job very difficult. I will play by their rules and I will talk of a Christian God. I will perhaps touch on a Jewish God. But what I will not do is play by those disingenuous rule sets. So, with that in mind, the core crux of this comes down to the fact that our society, as it stands currently, is so fundamentally rooted in Christian values. I'm talking about sort of the European Western societies, are so fundamentally rooted in Christian values that these values have become so rooted that actually they are taken for granted, and that actually to say as though people, whenever they become people, that the way society's moved now, that we've abandoned those values is actually wrong. But allow me to get into that. Mr. Kelly, the first speaker, was quite correct in his assessment that we gather a lot of our values from particularly Christian religion. But he then decided to say that it was the abandonment of God that in Nazis,
that in Cambodia created these terrible things. This is not necessarily correct. It wasn't that they just abandoned God. It wasn't that they just started to become less religious. They actively took on the values and the moral standards. That was that. Nazi values, Nazi standards were of that might made right. And this dates back to before Christianity. They gathered that through a pseudo-historical look at Sparta and at Rome. And on that, I would like to give a quote. This is based on the Roman Times from historian Tom Holland. Divinity, then, was for the very greatest of the great, for victors and heroes and kings. Its measure was the power to torture up one's enemies, not to suffer oneself. Might made right. And the thing that Christianity changed is that suffering became a value. That those that were weaker, those that were not necessarily the strongest, those that were not necessarily slaughtering others in the thousands, were not necessarily invalidated from being respected, invalidated from anything. Turn the other cheek. Rather than fight back, turn the other cheek. Is that not what Jesus said? And that is to not try to become the strongest, not try to become the king of the castle, but instead to take on that morality, to bear your cross, to engage in suffering. And that sort of brings me on to the fourth, to Mr. Hutchinson, because he said there was no foundation for us in good. I would contend that the fact that we've been able to stand here tonight and talk of good, and I would reckon that most people in this room had an idea of what good was, is a sign of how deeply rooted good is rooted in the Christian value, because we've derived that from Christianity, and we still value that, despite the fact that I reckon that there are people in this room who might not be religious themselves, and people within this room who are religious. No, thank you, let me continue. And that really brings me to, and why is that? Well, our core philosophies in society really are derived and have continued to be enshrined from Christian values. Liberalism, the idea that even within our international law system, that that all humans are equal, that there is a unique value to human life. That's a profoundly new and Christian ideal. The fact that we're not using bodies to show as to why you shouldn't rise up against them. No, sorry, actually, misspoke there. I will track that with caution because, well, socialism. Socialism, again, it's fight for the workers, fight for those that are not the top of society, fight for the meek, protect the rights of those that are not necessarily at the top, the strongest, the wealthiest, whatever. This can be argued, even though there is an abandonment of religion there in that philosophy, this could be argued, particularly within democratic socialism, to be based upon core Christian value. LGBTQ+, and these sort of movements that have risen up recently are all based on the fact that we should try to extend rights, protect others, and that there is something, and we see value in suffering. This is profoundly Christian. This is profoundly based in Christian ideology. It is seeped within our society. It's seeped within our society. As it goes back, we have not reserved divinity for mere kings and generals. I'll take your point, but I'm going to regret it.
I just wonder the point that you're making on the side that you're actually meant to be speaking on.
That is correct. Sorry. Let him continue.
Just very quickly, it's just I wonder what the point is whenever you're saying we don't regret the straying far from God because we're so close to Him already. I mean,
my point is that there are going to be many people. There are many people in this world that would describe themselves as of a liberal disposition or of a socialist disposition, or would defend many other things, or of other dispositions. I'm talking, in this world, I mean within our society, within our Western European society. Excuse me. And the values that they hold there, despite not necessarily being religious themselves, are profoundly Christian. And they don't need to be religious to hold those values, to hold a value that every person is equal, to hold a value that there is something noble in suffering. Suffering is not just reserved for religion. It is not, you do not necessarily need to be praying every day to be able to to turn the other cheek. That is our point. And Christianity adopts pagan traditions, pagan ways of life, the Celtic cross, the Christmas trees, the certain parts of celebration. Can that not be the same now? There isn't. The difference between society now and the Nazi society and the Cambodian society that were mentioned by the proposition is that our society is not seeking to completely overturn the values upon which society has been based. Our society is not seeking to try to take those on through might makes right or through we need to create a complete new world via destroying the old one. That is not what present society is doing. There is sin in this world, there is stuff that must be corrected for, but as Christianity tells us, there is always temptation, and there is always the temptation towards evil. So that is the case for the opposition. I hope you vote for us. I haven't really done it justice, but thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Now we'll move on to questions. So how this works is we'll start with a question for the proposition. Once they've answered, the opposition can respond. Then we'll go to an opposition question and the proposition then respond. And then we'll move to an abstention question which must be put fairly to both sides. Do I have a question for the proposition first, please?
So, my question is for the third proposition, Mr. Young, Jack Stage. Jack, you spoke quite passionately about the dangers, the abhorrent conditions laid about by a society which is so individualistic, so focused on so financial and general self-satisfaction, entirely individualistic. And, we kind of touched on the economics of it, and to me, Jack, it sounded like you were advocating for socialism. And Jack, I'm asking you, are you advocating for socialism, Jack? Or some kind of Christian socialism?
I think my speech was a reference to Margaret Thatcher being one of God's gifts. That should be the signal. Otherwise, what I would say on that basis is that I'm not advocating for socialism, given I just limited the horrors it committed. But what I am saying is that every person should be like Jesus in his characteristic kindness to others. I know there was a reference to lack of kindness earlier, but in Luke chapter 6, it talks about how the Most High Lord is kind unto others. And that kindness and that caring, compassion and attitudes toward others is deeply, deeply devoid in the society that we have today. And I think that the ye shall be as God's mentality is far too prevalent. And we must remember that there are other people in society who are worthy of love and God's love. Because God loves everyone there. And even you, He loves you. You're not an atomic accident, you're here. You're the purpose of God. Has a plan for you and He has a love for you. Alright?
Any response to the opposition, Ben?
If I may just say, that was my point exactly.
I feel that you've raised an incredibly important point, and I feel this is one of my key frustrations with the proposition's argument, because it's very disingenuous to claim the religious authority that Christian values are therefore the only correct religious values, because they're all, any religious values are the most important religious values. I appreciate the fact that that was not what you argued for, Misha, but that is quite literally what Jack argued. That is quite literally what the closing speaker for the proposition argued. So you might take umbrage with that, but just taking the grand picture, that's what happened. But the fact of the matter is that there are several religions with several different core beliefs. So I believe it's disingenuous to claim that any religion is objectively correct, and that by not adhering to those values specifically, that we have strayed further away from God. For example, the reliance on technology as being straying further away from God. Well, for a Scientologist, bearing in mind I'm not a Scientologist myself, but for a Scientologist, who believes in the religion of Scientology, that is moving towards God. That's moving towards the values that they believe God holds. So I believe this is the key problem with the propositions argument, is that they're taking a specific set of values and setting that as the objective fact. Whereas if we take religion as a whole, across all the spectrums and all the different varieties of God that people believe in, we cannot as a house decide that we have moved away from God.
Now, we need to go question for the opposition, Kira.
Right, so I think the third speaker touched on this a lot, this notion that basically religion creates these institutions that are inherently bad. But the problem is, how do I describe this? Kind of being bad to people and being discriminatory can happen without religion, and often does. Like, for example, in France, in a society that prizes itself on being secular, being atheist, literally uses that to discriminate against those with religious faiths. So, for example, in France, you're not allowed to wear religious symbols. You are arrested, for example, if you wear a burqa in public, and this has led to rising rates of terrorism because basically Islamic people don't feel comfortable in spaces, so they get radicalized more easily. So, how do I put this? Religion doesn't automatically make things good or bad. It can just be an inherent awful part of society, in that we will use anything at our disposal to be awful to people, not necessarily religion itself. So how do you address that?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, look, I'm not denying for 1 second that religion is responsible, or that, like, religion, I'm not going to assert that religion is responsible for all the moral woes of the world. What I will say is it's much easier for things like democracy and things like conversation and things like debates like this to change those morals and change those ways. Where when it comes to religion and you're coming up against 2,000-year-old scriptures and you're coming up against the word of God, that's a bit of a harder conversation. So when they do bad things and they perpetuate bad morals, they last for centuries. Whereas while political tensions, radicalism and all these problems absolutely could remain pervasive for a long time, I do think democracy is a more effective corrective measure than a scripture that literally doesn't get amended in millennia.
Proposition to respond?
Yes, I think that touches again on the fundamental distinction here between the proposition and the opposition, and perhaps was misunderstood by what I'm saying. I was not saying that secular people are not good people. What I am saying is that secularism has no foundation, no basis by which we can define what is good and bad except your own moral intuition. And my response to that has been, who said who cursed, by what standard? Whereas the Christian, because of the whole system by which we believe, namely that each human being is created in the image of God and worthy of dignity and respect, and because we reflect the image of the God of whom we bear, we know intuitively what is right or wrong. Our conscience convicts us, and then we have the scriptures as well to guide us. So my point is, without God we have no foundation for good, and each of member of the opposition and this question assumes that there is good and bad. And what I'm saying is, fundamentally, you cannot assume that there is good. You cannot assume moral categories without God.
No, it's abstention question. Yeah.
I think the opposition touched on it a bit, but I just want to hear from both sides. Why do we genuinely think that moving away from God as a society is a bad thing? Do you genuinely think that society now, where women are tied to their relationship with men, have the right to remove fetus from their rapists, and gay people can live freely, is worse than how it was 200 years ago, where religion was the majority?
Can you take the proposition first on a response?
I think that society has moved away from God because we've forgotten how to forgive, how to love, how to be compassionate, how to have peace, how to respect one another. As Peter rightly pointed out, secularism rests upon quite a fallacious base, but you can argue about that religion was done, but I'm talking about God and the character of God. In 1 Corinthians 13:13 says, faith, love, and hope are the most important things, and all of these, love is the most important. I have a female minister. She is very successful in the job she's been doing since 1983, and times have moved on, and religion has committed grave various things, but God is omnipotent, He is constant and consistent in His character.
Opposition to respond, please.
Just as you can go.
I agree with you in the sense, I mean, sort of Paul pointed out, trying to touch on the areas, we don't actually have actual secularism, because even the secularism that we have is so steeped in a Christian tradition, and a lot of its values is steeped in Christian tradition, and that's not a bad thing. That's the point, but it's moving away from God, it's moving away from some more, to your point, some more worse aspects that are, you could argue, not so necessarily saying this, but I could argue decrepit. So yeah, we do, you were touching on secularism and all this, and how we are secularism. Part of the point is that actually it's not how secular are we, whenever a lot of values we hold are steeped fundamentally in Christian tradition. So it's not, and I think you're right, compassionate. Yeah, there's more compassionate movements nowadays. I mean, there are also movements of hate, but there have always been movements of hate. I mean, if you look back at the 1600s, 30 Years' War, stuff like that, no quarter was offered in a lot of those battles, and people, innocent, non-combatants, were just slaughtered in towns. My point is that hate has always existed, but there's a lot more compassion nowadays, and that applies a Christian thing, despite the fact there's been an argument that we've moved so far away from God that we can't be compassionate.
Thank you for that. And just before we move to the vote on speaker ability, can I thank all speakers for their participation this evening, in which has been a lively debate, but in particular, can I thank our two guest speakers, Michael and Mary Lou, for coming along tonight. Your attendance has been fantastic, your speeches were great, and we've all learned so much from you. So can we have a big round of applause for our speakers?
Very nice of you, thank you.
We'll now move on to the vote on speaker ability. Remember, this isn't the side of the debate you necessarily agree with, it is the side which gave the most, the best speeches and spoke the best overall. So if you'd like to vote for the proposition, please raise your hand now.
I genuinely believe my opposite on this would buy
20. If you'd like to vote for the opposition, please raise your hand now. And if you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now. Can we get the vote on speaker ability, please?
Yes. So on the question, there are 23 votes for the proposition, 17 for the opposition, and 3 abstentions. So I don't know, Strangford, maybe the opposition has it.
Before we close, we have just 2 things from our esteemed social officer.
So, as I mentioned before, we are all going to Literific. We have a booking. Our 2 guests, you're very, very welcome to join us, of course, and we hope that you do. And as well, next Monday at 7 o'clock in the wee bar in the Students' Union, we have our first charity social of the year. It's our first karaoke event of the year, bringing back the old tradition. So please come along. For a good cause. Please bring change or cash. Bring all the cash you want. Give it to us. For a good cause, please do come along. And I might buy you a shot or a drink if you sing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Can we get all the speakers up to the front for a photo? Thank you.